I live in a decent residential complex in the suburbs of Phoenix. Nothing special, but the parking is fine, there are designated spaces, good lighting, everything as it should be. I drive a 2019 Honda Civic, which I take very good care of. It's not a Ferrari, but it's my car, and I keep it in perfect condition. Every weekend, I wash it, vacuum the interior, and do everything that needs to be done. My friends think I'm obsessed, but honestly, it's one of the few things in my life that I can really control, especially after my divorce last year. Anyway, about 6 months ago, I started noticing strange scratches on my car. At first, I thought it was normal wear and tear or that someone had accidentally hit it with their keys or something. But then it kept happening. Every few weeks, a new scratch would appear, always on the driver's side, always at the same height. Deep enough to catch your fingernail, but not enough to require a complete repaint. Just, really annoying. I asked my neighbors, contacted the management company, even posted a notice on the bulletin board asking if anyone had seen anything. Nothing. The manager, a middle-aged woman named Karen, I swear that's her name, just shrugged and said, "Boys will be boys," which really pissed me off because she was basically admitting that she knew it was intentional vandalism, but she didn't care. The scratches kept appearing. Every time I had one removed at a local repair shop, $40 a pop, by the way, a new one would show up within a week. I was seriously upset. So much so that I couldn't sleep. My buddy Jake thought I was overreacting, but I don't know, man. When you're already dealing with the stress of rebuilding your life after major changes, having someone constantly vandalize your property feels different, you know? After the 8th or 9th scratch appeared, I decided I'd had enough. I wasn't going to spend any more money on this problem and hope it would go away on its own. It was time to go into detective mode. First, I tried the obvious things. I started parking in different spots around the complex, thinking maybe it was related to a specific location. Nope, it didn't matter where I parked, in my spot or in the guest spot, the scratches kept reappearing. I tried changing my schedule, sometimes staying late at work, sometimes coming home early for lunch. No luck. This person was persistent and, by the looks of it, had a lot of free time. I spent hours walking around the complex looking for clues. I checked other cars to see if they had similar damage, they didn't, and looked for anything that could have caused such scratches. I even became a real detective from the TV show, CSI, and photographed the scratches with a ruler for scale, documenting each one with a time stamp. My sister Emma thought I was crazy, but honestly, I was probably on the verge. The breakthrough came when I was talking to my downstairs neighbor, an elderly man named Robert who has lived here for 15 years. He's one of those retirees who spends most of his day sitting on his balcony just watching life go by. I figured if anyone had seen anything, it would be him. "Oh, you mean the scratches on your car?" he asked when I brought it up. "Yeah, I saw that kid messing with your car a few times. I thought maybe it was your nephew or something." A kid. Of course it was a kid. Robert described him as 12 or 13 years old, skinny, always wearing a red hoodie. He said he saw him near my car after school, usually around 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This coincided perfectly with the time I usually found new scratches, they always appeared in the morning, so they were probably made the day before. Now I knew when and who was doing it, but I still needed proof. More importantly, I needed to find out exactly who it was so I could talk to his parents. This is where things get interesting, and some of you will probably start judging me. But hear me out. I decided to set up a surveillance system. But not just any camera, I splurged. I spent about $300 on a pair of cameras that hunters use, with night vision and motion sensors. They are completely waterproof, battery-powered, and inconspicuous. I installed one on a lamppost about 20 feet from my usual parking spot, angled so that it would capture the driver's side of my car. I hid the second one in some nearby bushes to get a backup angle. The cameras were set to record in HD when motion was detected, and all recordings were saved to SD cards that I could review later. I also installed an app on my phone that sent me notifications when the cameras were triggered, although I turned this feature off during rush hour because the motion sensor seemed to be triggered by everything and anything. While I was setting up my surveillance network, I also scouted around the complex. I started paying attention to children who fit Robert's description, where they lived, and how they spent their time. I know how that sounds, but I wasn't intrusive, I just observed public areas during my regular trips. There were 3 children who fit the general description. One lived in Building C with his mother and, from my limited contact with him, seemed like a pretty good kid. Another lived in Building A with people who looked like his grandparents, always polite when I saw him, helping carry groceries and so on. The third child lived in Building B, the same as me, just 1 floor above. This one was different. I saw him hanging around the parking lot after school, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. He acted like he owned the place. And yes, he wore a red hoodie almost every day. I had a prime suspect, but I needed proof. The cameras would give me that proof. All I had to do was be patient and wait for him to strike again. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day I came home from work expecting to see a new scratch, and every day I was almost disappointed when my car was fine. It was like waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I knew he would strike again. It had been going on for months, and vandals are creatures of habit. It took almost 3 weeks, but I finally caught him. I submitted the report on a Tuesday night after Jessica had gone to bed. Hit send and immediately felt this mix of satisfaction and terror. There was no taking it back now. The investigation started quietly. I only knew because Jessica came home stressed one day, mentioning that HR was asking questions about expense reports and company events. She seemed worried but didn't know why I was asking so many questions about it. 2 weeks later, everything exploded. Brandon got called into a meeting with corporate. Turns out, my little tip triggered a full audit of his department. They found way more than I expected, not just the charity thing, but a pattern of financial irregularities going back years. Jessica called me at work, crying. Brandon had been suspended pending investigation. The promotion was obviously off the table. But here's where it gets crazy, because Brandon was her direct supervisor, Jessica got pulled into the investigation too. See, Brandon had been signing off on Jessica's expense reports, some of which were apparently questionable. Business lunches that looked personal, conference expenses that didn't match up with actual conferences. Jessica swore she didn't know anything was wrong, that Brandon told her everything was approved. I felt this sick satisfaction watching her panic. Finally, she was feeling some of what I felt. But then the guilt hit me. This wasn't just about Brandon anymore, I was watching my wife's career implode. The investigation kept expanding. Corporate brought in external auditors, forensic accountants, the works. What started as a simple ethics violation was turning into potential embezzlement charges. The local news picked up the story because of the charity connection. Jessica wasn't sleeping, barely eating. She'd sit at the kitchen table with legal documents, trying to prove her innocence. Part of me wanted to comfort her, but another part thought she deserved this stress after what she put me through. The investigation kept expanding like a cancer. What started with Brandon's department spread to other divisions. Turns out his schemes were more sophisticated than anyone realized. He'd been creating fake vendors, submitting inflated invoices, even skimming money from client payments. The guy was basically running a one-man crime syndicate inside a legitimate business. Jessica hired a lawyer with money we didn't really have. Our savings account was draining fast, and now she wasn't bringing in any income. I watched her stress levels skyrocket as she tried to prove she had no knowledge of Brandon's crimes. The irony wasn't lost on me, I was the one who'd started this avalanche, and now I had to watch it bury my own wife. The worst part was how scared she looked. This confident, successful woman I'd married was reduced to jumping every time the phone rang, convinced the police were coming for her next. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Jessica answered, and I heard her gasp. Brandon had been arrested. Not just fired, actually arrested on embezzlement charges. Turns out he'd been stealing from multiple company accounts for years, covering it up with fake invoices and inflated expense reports. Jessica was cleared of criminal wrongdoing, but the company decided to let her go anyway. Restructuring, they called it, but we both knew the truth. She was collateral damage from my revenge. That night, she broke down completely. Told me everything. Yes, she'd developed feelings for Brandon. Yes, they'd gotten close emotionally. But she swore nothing physical ever happened, and now she felt like an idiot for risking our marriage over someone who turned out to be a criminal. I sat there listening to her sob, feeling this weird mix of vindication and horror. I'd wanted them to suffer, but this was way beyond what I'd planned. Brandon was facing serious jail time. Jessica's reputation in her industry was destroyed. And somehow, I felt responsible for all of it. The crazy part? Jessica started leaning on me for support. With Brandon gone and her job lost, I was all she had left. We started talking more honestly than we had in years. About our marriage, about what went wrong, about whether we could fix it. I wanted to tell her what I'd done, but how do you admit you're responsible for destroying someone's life? Even someone who betrayed you? Brandon's case made the local business journal. Marketing executive charged with embezzling $200,000. His mugshot was right there on page 1. I felt sick looking at it. The article went into detail about his schemes, how he'd been stealing for years, how the investigation started with an anonymous tip. Reading it felt surreal, seeing the consequences of my actions laid out in black and white newsprint. They quoted the prosecutor saying it was one of the most elaborate embezzlement cases they'd seen in years. Jessica read the article too, shaking her head in disbelief. I can't believe I worked for this man for 3 years and never suspected anything, she said. I feel so stupid. How did I not see the signs? I almost choked on my coffee. If only she knew that her husband was the one who'd connected all those dots, who'd brought down the man she'd been emotionally involved with. The guilt was becoming unbearable, but I couldn't figure out how to confess without destroying what little trust we'd managed to rebuild. 6 months later, Brandon pled guilty. Got 3 years in prison and had to pay full restitution. His wife divorced him, took the kids and moved across the country. Guy went from successful executive to convicted felon because I couldn't handle seeing my wife laugh with another man. Jessica struggled to find work. Her name was connected to the scandal, and the marketing world is smaller than you'd think. She eventually took a job at a much smaller firm for half her previous salary. We had to sell the house, move into a smaller apartment. But here's the weird part, our marriage actually got stronger. Going through that crisis together, supporting each other when everything fell apart, it brought us closer than we'd been in years. Jessica never knew I was behind it all, but the guilt was eating me alive. One night, after a few drinks, I almost told her. We were talking about Brandon, about how crazy it was that he turned out to be a thief. Jessica said, I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd actually gotten involved with him. I could have gone to prison too. That stopped me cold. I'd been so focused on my hurt feelings that I never considered she could have faced criminal charges. What if she'd been more involved in his schemes? What if my revenge had sent my own wife to prison? I started having panic attacks, couldn't concentrate at work. The weight of what I'd done was crushing me. I'd wanted justice, but this felt more like destruction. Jessica noticed my anxiety and insisted I see a therapist. Ironic, right? She was trying to help me deal with the guilt of destroying her life. The therapist, Dr. Martinez, was this kind older woman who specialized in trauma and relationship issues. I told her about discovering Jessica's emotional affair, about the stress of almost losing my marriage, about the guilt I felt watching her struggle to rebuild her career. All true, just not the complete truth. Betrayal trauma is real, she explained during one session. When someone we trust breaks that trust, it can trigger all kinds of responses. Anger, desire for revenge, guilt about those feelings, it's all normal. Normal. If only she knew how far I'd taken those normal feelings. I wanted to tell her everything, but how do you admit to a mental health professional that you systematically destroyed someone's life? That you used your technical skills to ruin multiple families because you couldn't handle your emotions like a grown man? Instead, I just nodded and talked about forgiveness and moving forward, all while carrying this massive secret that was eating me alive from the inside. It's been a year now since everything went down. Brandon's in prison, Jessica's slowly rebuilding her career, and I'm still carrying this secret. Some days I think about confessing everything. Other days I convince myself it was justified, they betrayed me first. The therapist says guilt is a normal response to trauma, that discovering infidelity can trigger all kinds of emotional reactions. If only she knew the real source of my guilt. Jessica and I are doing better than we have in years. We go to couples counseling, we communicate more openly, we actually spend time together instead of just existing in the same house. It's like the crisis forced us to remember why we fell in love in the first place. But there's this shadow over everything. Every time Jessica mentions how unfair it was that she lost her job, every time she talks about Brandon's poor family, I feel this crushing weight. I single-handedly destroyed multiple lives because I couldn't handle my emotions like an adult. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just confronted them directly, or filed for divorce, or gone to marriage counseling first. Would Jessica have chosen me? Would we have worked things out without all this destruction? I'll never know, because I chose revenge instead. And now I have to live with the consequences of that choice forever. The worst part? I got what I wanted. Brandon's life is ruined, Jessica learned her lesson about emotional affairs, and our marriage is stronger than ever. But the cost was so much higher than I ever imagined. If you're reading this and thinking about revenge, don't. Just don't. There are always unintended consequences, and you might not be able to live with yourself afterward. Some victories aren't worth winning. I got my revenge, sure. Brandon's in prison, his family destroyed, his career obliterated. Jessica learned the hard way about the dangers of emotional infidelity. Our marriage survived and even thrived. But I wake up every morning knowing I'm responsible for sending a man to prison, for destroying his children's lives, for traumatizing my own wife in ways she'll never fully understand. The anonymous tip line is still active at Jessica's old company. Sometimes I wonder if they ever figured out who made that call, if there's some investigation file sitting in HR with my digital fingerprints all over it. But it's been a year, and nobody's come knocking. Maybe I'll tell Jessica someday. Maybe I'll take this secret to my grave. All I know is that revenge isn't the justice I thought it would be. It's just another kind of prison, and I'm serving a life sentence.